Okay, good evening, everyone. Hope everybody's doing well. I'd like to call to order the continuation of our fiscal year 2025 budget meeting that we adjourned from last week. This meeting is being broadcast, as always, live on Peabody TV. Our recording secretary, Laura Bowe, is taking our minutes, and certainly members of the public can access the meeting via live stream, peabodytv.org, as well as their Facebook. I'm not going to give a speech. I did want to touch on a couple of things, though, where we left off. Right now, we did make some cuts over the last few meetings, and I have our number at $95,831,564. Still some work to do on achieving our number that we've been working off of at the $94,277,540. Again, not a position that any of us want to be at. We got hit with some difficult numbers over the last few months. Some were expected, some I did want to mention a couple of very difficult ones that we got hit with that have put strain on all of us, on all of our budgets, not just on the school side, but certainly on the city side with police, fire, DPS, all the different departments of our city have all been having these discussions and multiple meetings to try to work through our department needs, but also recognizing that we have a little less money to work with. The biggest hit that we took this year came in state aid. We get two forms of state aid. One is unrestricted general government aid, commonly referred to as UGA money, and then also Chapter 70, which is education money. This year, well, let me take a step back. 2 years ago, we were over $8 million increase in state aid from the previous year to that year. Last year, we had a $4.6 million increase over the year before. This year, it was 1.4, less than 3.2 million less than we got an increase in the year before. That puts serious strain on all of us. The health insurance went up the largest, I think, in city history that I'm aware of. It was a 9.95% increase in health insurance across the board. That's about a $1.6 million increase citywide, significant. Our Essex Tech went up $700,000 this year, which is the largest in the last few years, the largest increase. And then our typical salary COLA adjustments that we negotiated with all of our unions with the 3% COLA increases. Retirement went up over $500,000. So some, again, were expected, others were not, and put some additional strain on all of us here. And all of us want to do the right thing. We're trying to work our way through it with questions and trying to work together on this. So we're going to continue to do so today. I know there's some additional information, Dr. Vidala, that you've put together. If there's no other preliminary questions, I'd like to go to Dr. Vidala to kind of open things up. But before we do it, I forgot again. I should not be forgetting this. If we could please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, Mrs. Dunn.
Could I withdraw my request that I made at the last meeting to prepare a letter to send to the legislature concerning the amendments for the budget? The amendments failed, and the letter wouldn't do any good.
Okay.
Thank you.
We don't need to make a motion.
No.
We don't need to make a motion to withdraw.
No.
All right, everybody okay with that? Any comments? Thank you, Mrs. Dunn. All right, so again, if there's no questions, specific questions at this point, I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Vidala, and then certainly we can go forward with questions at that point. So, Dr. Vidala?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. That was a very good synopsis of where we've been, sort of how we've got here. Again, I want to thank everyone for the budget process that we've done this year. It was a very thoughtful process with our principals coming before the committee and putting forth their asks and their wants. We started off with a big number, and we know that we had to whittle that down. So the last proposed budget we had was a little over $96 million as the proposal, and we know that the target is $94,277,540. So that was about a difference of about 1.9. The number that the mayor said was about $95,831 in change. That is all right. So I did prepare a sheet of paper for the committee where we started at that 96, 191, 890. Have a number of proposals here. Built into that are two items that were voted on and approved. You see the non-salary reductions of about $120,000. That was $50,000 from the center school, which was realized by, we got some favorable quotes in our moving expenses and some of the items that we're going to purchase for the new classrooms and the setups of the new building. So we felt pretty confident about that. And then the committee identified about $70,000 in additional non-salary items that were voted on. So that's incorporated there. There was also $150,000 in a salary, an administrative salary due to a retirement. That is incorporated here towards the bottom. And then we have some positions that we'd like to discuss tonight, and then some calculated risks that we'd be okay taking. So just to sort of recap how we got to these specific positions, we never want to reduce the budget or cut positions. Unfortunately, that is a necessary evil that we are faced with when we have to make budget reductions. So what we're trying to do is identify items that would be open positions or positions that have not been posted that may, potentially, have some savings that wouldn't necessarily impact or result in a layoff. Try to identify positions that were not in the FY24 budget, this current budget that we have, this current school year, so positions that were not there. So really hoping to just be able to continue our level service, provide the services that we're providing this year, and be able to reduce. So some of those positions were created during the budget process. Very challenging thing that's going to happen next year is it will be closing the center school for renovations. And unfortunately, those students and teachers have to be displaced. And we were try to be very thoughtful about the process that we use to do that, really honor people, provide them with some dignity, provide them with some choice on where they could go. And we wanted to make sure that there were plenty of landing spots or plenty of open positions in the district to make that happen. We were able to do that in January and make sure that all of our center school staff were able to have a home for next year in a position that they had some options and they had some choice. Since then, there have been some positions that have become open due to resignations or retirements that were not anticipated at that time. Some of those positions I'm going to propose that we reduce for next year so that we're able to maintain the services that we have, but also not post those positions and take on that liability, rather just through some attrition be able to do that. So going down this list, one of those positions is a position at the Brown School. There's a teaching position. Currently we have 2 first grade classrooms, and so in a typical year we would rise up and have 2 second grade classrooms. So that's one of the proposals. It would not necessarily increase from the budget this year. It would not require a layoff as it's a new position. There were 3 positions at the Carroll School. One is a reading teacher. That is a new position that was added this year as far as the center school move comes into play. But we did recently get a request for a 1-year leave of absence, so the recommendation would be to leave that position open for the year so that that person could return to their position and we wouldn't take on the liability for this year. The other position was a new ELL teacher that we were looking at. We were looking to have 7 ELL teachers at the Carroll next year. In speaking with the principal and the ELL director, based on the numbers, we can be able to service all of our ELL students, including those coming from the center, with 6 teachers, and the recommendation would be to not post an additional new position that was not in the budget this year.
Could I, Dr. Vidal, can I interrupt you just for a moment? I just want to make sure I understand. So these positions that you've listed, these last 4, are the one at the Brown, the 2 at the Carroll. So those are positions where there was nobody in that position in this current school year. These were positions that you, talking with principals, that you were hoping to be able to add this year. So you're just kind of pulling back on that.
Yes. So these were positions that if we didn't have the center school move, and they're not in the budget this year, but we were proposing this as a nice to have, and now that all of the center school teachers are in positions and they have positions, the resulting open positions, we would be looking to not add or to reduce. So these are, a lot of these positions don't exist right now. So for example, this ELL position, we were looking to add a 7th person, but we think that we can make do with 6. And so based on the numbers, the ELL director and the principal are saying 6. The next position here is a school counselor, and that is a position that has been vacated through a resignation. It is a position that is in this year's budget. Not filling it would not require a layoff, but that's one that I think is the hardest. And in my opinion, this is one of the hardest positions to not fill. And if there were other funding sources, I think that would be one that I would love to reinstate if we could. The paraprofessional position at the South School, right now we have 2.5 FTEs, I'm sorry, 3.5 FTEs at the South School, and that's full-time equivalents. And we were looking to bring that to 4.5 for next year, and that would basically be able to absorb some of the transfers for the center school people. However, we can meet the needs of the kids with the 3.5, just doing the level service, and there are other open positions that we could put our center school paraprofessionals in for next year, and we would not have to lay anybody off. So that is, again, another position where it is not in this year's budget, and we can absorb the people in other places. Similarly, the next position there at the Higgins, we were looking to expand our co-teaching program next year from 2 teachers at the 8th grade level to 4 teachers. That would be wonderful, and we would like to do that, but they are able to meet everyone's needs with those 2 teachers. So the recommendation would be to not add 2 more positions, just to keep status quo with what they have. Moving into the high school, these are the last 3 positions that I'd like to discuss. We have 3 openings for math teachers at the high school. Talking to Principal Randall, we could probably meet the needs of the kids with 2 teachers rather than the 3. Again, personally, if there's a way to find additional funds, I would love to bring back that math teacher and keep the math classes size smaller if we could do that. We added a business teacher just to have more offerings, but that position doesn't exist. So one of the recommendations would be just to not fill it. And similarly, we talked about adding an additional ELL teacher at the high school to meet the needs of the kids. But again, talking to Principal Randall and our ELL director, based on the numbers, we could make do without adding an ELL teacher. So that would not, it's not in this year's budget. It would not require a layoff. It's just a new position that we were proposing, but we don't necessarily need that position. So I'll pause there and answer any questions.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Vidala. I'll open it up. Mr. Olympio?
Thank you, Dr. Vidala. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Would there be an opportunity under athletics, the salaries line? If I'm looking at the high school math teacher, and that's for about $70,000. Would there be an opportunity to maybe pay some of those coaches' salaries out of the revolving account?
Yes, that's an excellent idea. So the revolving account is basically funded through any money that comes in. So students that pay an athletic user fee, that money goes into the revolving account, and we can spend that money. So we could do an offset. We could offset the coaches' salaries based on the money that is being received for $70,000, and that could pay for the math teacher. So that is definitely. We're able to use that funds for that purpose, and it would free up money in the appropriated account.
Okay. I'll yield. Well, actually, I'd like to make a motion that we reappropriate money from the athletics wage line, pay it out of the revolving account to fund a math teacher at the high school.
Second.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Olympio. You've heard the motion, seconded by Mrs. Dunn. Any comments or questions on this motion? Okay, roll call vote, please.
Mr. Hockman.
Yes.
Mr. Swanson.
Yes.
Mrs. Dunn.
Yes.
Mr. Olympio.
Yes.
Mrs. Carpenter.
Yes.
Mr. Miko.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Olympio. So that would be a $70,000 reduction in the budget that would be filled by the athletic revolving fund. Okay. Great. So that math position would be back. Mr. Olympio, thank you. Any other comments at this time?
I'll yield for now, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, thank you. Any other comments, questions at this time? Okay. So, Dr. Vidal, I know we've kind of, both you and I have touched on the hope that some additional money may be coming down the road here. We're hopeful of that. Can't guarantee it, obviously, but hopeful. Is there, in your mind, your team, where should some additional funding come in that you would identify as the most, the ones that you would like to bring back?
Yes, so I think that the reading teacher and the school counselor at the Carroll are two areas that I think that we could definitely support. And I do believe we talked about two different opportunities for funding to come in the fall. One would be if the Senate were to change the Chapter 70 formula or look at the inflation rate. And unfortunately, as Ms. Griffin-Dunn pointed out, that's not going to be a possibility for us this year. The Senate has withdrawn that amendment. So that's not an opportunity. However, the money that we get from the McKinney-Vento reimbursement, there is an indication that there may be new funding available for the kids that are coming into kindergarten for next year. And I do believe that we could probably take on maybe 2 salaries from that funding. I think I would be comfortable taking on 2 salaries.
And your recommendation would be the reading teacher at the Carroll and the school counselor at the Carroll?
Yes, I think with kids moving and things like that, having a counselor, I know it was a recommendation that came in last year, or maybe the year before that. And, with the kids coming over from the Welch School, having an additional counselor has really helped out the Carroll School, and having the kids come over from the Carroll, from the center to the Carroll, and increasing those numbers. I think having that counselor, even though it's vacant right now, I think having another counselor would be very helpful for the staff and the students over at the Carroll.
Okay, thank you. Any comments, Mrs. Carpenter?
Thank you, through the chair to Dr. Vidala. On that subject, so that would cover the reading teacher and the counselor at the Carroll, and that's 87,953 and 64,725?
Yes.
Would cover both of those?
Yes, I think we could cover both of those, yes.
So that would be about 152,000 between those two positions.
Make a motion to follow recommendation of the superintendent regarding both positions and the funding source identified.
Second.
Thank you, Mrs. Carpenter. You've heard the motion, seconded by Mrs. Dunn. Any comments or questions? Mr. Huckman?
Yeah, thank you. Dr. Vidali, thank you for identifying some potential funding sources, and Ms. Carpenter, thank you for making the motion to utilize them in what I at least believe to be an appropriate way. But before I want to vote on utilizing those funds for these positions, which I'd like to talk about the IDEA grant and some of the allocations used through that grant to see if perhaps those 2 positions might be able to be funded through the IDEA grant. And I'm looking at and these are really questions that are coming purely out of ignorance on my part. I just don't know. So page 7 of 14 on the IDEA grant has partial funding for out-of-district tuition for $100,000. And I don't know what historically we use out of that. Is it completely exhausted, or is there funds left over? It seems like it's partial funding, so I don't know if it's covering a shortfall somewhere, or it is the beginning of an allocation and then the balance is covered.
So in general, they typically put money aside in case there's a move-in, or in case it's unanticipated costs, or a student that we have right now who's in district who might be placed out of district, but we didn't budget for it. So that's usually what that's for. So IDEA is the grant for special education. So most of the salaries in there are paraprofessionals. Counselors are an acceptable use. However, this counselor position was a general ed type counselor, more for all students. It wasn't a school adjustment counselor that was servicing IEPs. So that, we'll have to check on that. The reading teacher is again for general ed students. It's not providing special ed services. So we would have to check on if that would pass the muster of the audit.
We certainly have counselors that fall under IEP services, and
Correct.
and if we had a counselor in our non-grant
In the
budget,
appropriated budget,
the
yeah.
appropriated
Yes,
budget,
we could do that.
We could shift it if necessary. I don't know that that's, I'm still, I'm a little less ignorant, but still fairly ignorant when I don't know if this is a risk that is something that, and I, you know, we may have a recess or two tonight and we can get an answer afterwards. I'm just looking at things like that. I'm also looking at, through the IDEA grant, on page 6 of 14, there's, it looks like on the top portion of this page, 160, a little shy of $164,000 allocated for a BCBA and a few other members. And are these contracted services or are these staff members?
So those are staff members to do behavioral therapies and,
Yep.
and things like that.
So this money's already allocated
That's
somewhere.
allocated to current staff members.
And then the portion of the page below that has $50,000 for, it looks like a .6 BCBA. Is that a similar? Okay. In the evaluation on page 5 of 14, there's $80,000 allocated, and there's a pretty detailed breakdown as to the, where the $80,000 goes for evaluations. Is that also similar, is that stipends that go to staff members that perform evaluations? Maybe we get you up to a microphone.
Crompton,
I'm
thank you.
sorry.
Mr. Miko, yeah, come on. Thank you, Mr. Miko.
Thank you, Ms. Crompton.
Sure.
I didn't mean to, I really don't mean to put you on the spot. If there's
That's okay.
time that you need to give us information, then that's certainly fine by me. I think we were talking about the evaluations, $80,000 allocated for evaluations.
Yep, so evaluations would be based on students who require foreign language evaluations if English isn't their first language, psychologists, speech therapists, any of those evals, as well as independent evals requested by families, and any assessments that we're not able to complete in Portuguese, Haitian, Creole, or Spanish.
So, and am I to assume that these are contracted services because we don't have those specialties within the district?
Yes.
Okay, and I guess, is this historically an amount that gets allocated for these services? And if so, is it, how do we approach the limit of it, or do we have,
Yeah, we're getting close to the limit.
okay. All right, thank you.
Certainly.
Thank you, Mr. Huckman. Any other comments or questions on the motion before us? And Dr. Vidala, can you just again identify that
Yep.
funding source for me, please?
So we're looking at about $152,000 out of the funding coming from the emergency shelter.
All right, and the number I had is between the two salaries is $152,678. Okay. Any further comments or questions, Mr. Huckman?
It's, I guess I look at the funding, or I hope that the funding is coming through for services to provided for specific people who were in need of those services, and we're talking about not using it for its intended purpose, but for other purposes. And that makes me, that gets me worried. That gets me worried a little bit, and Sure, I think that Peabody's a supportive community, and I know there's a lot of great people and a lot of great things happening for, I think, the population that we're talking about, that this money is intended for. It just gives me some pause, because I'm just wondering what is it that this population isn't gonna get? What are they gonna do without? Because we're taking a significant amount of money, $150,000+ to pay for a few salaries for a school that I don't even think many of these kids attend. I think most of them are on the highway and going to the McCarthy and places over like that. So I certainly get pause with this, and I understand, you know, the logic behind it. Nobody wants to make the difficult decisions that I think we're ultimately going to need to get to tonight anyway, but I don't know, maybe I wish that this was a little further down the night and we can talk about other possibilities first. I'm reluctant to I'm reluctant to not support it, but I understand the reason for supporting it, because those two positions are also important to me, and I think it provides a lot of help to students and staff at the Carroll School, and a lot of services to a lot of kids. So anyway, those are my 2 cents.
If I could just,
Thank you,
just
Mr. Hoffman. Dr. Vidal on that?
provide maybe a little peace of mind. I wouldn't necessarily put these 2 positions in that grant. I would reinstate these positions into the appropriated budget and find something that we're paying out of the appropriated budget that's going directly to those students. Because there's money we spend in kind for those students, so I would make sure that we're allocating the funds that are going directly to you know, students that would be receiving that. So it would be, you know, the additional $152,678 from the budget. We'd have to take that out from somewhere where those allocations are being paid for out of the appropriated budget, and then reinstate these 2 positions.
If I may, Mr. Mayor. Thank you. Dr. Vidal, thank you. Thank you for reassuring me. Is there any possibility that we're able to identify where we're reallocating before we, at least before we have a public vote, not, you know, the public vote on the budget, so that we have an idea as to how we're going to be able to do that? Again, I'm not expecting people to have every answer to every question as we bring them up tonight, but I guess I'd just like to know, when I'm going to vote on a budget, you know, where the lines are and where the shifts are and what the final product is going to look like.
So the majority of students are attending the the majority of students are attending the McCarthy School, the Higgins School, and the high school, and with some students attending the South. So we would identify an applicable funding source in one of those budgets, and be able to put in an offset of this amount, so that these students for these 2 positions are able to be reinstated.
Thank you, Mr. Hockman. Mr. Swanson, you're all set? Okay, thank you. Okay, any further questions? Roll call vote, please.
Mr. Hockman.
Yes.
Mr. Swanson.
Yes.
Mrs. Dunn.
Yes.
Mr. Olympio.
Yes.
Mrs. Carpenter.
Yes.
Mr. Amico.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Mrs. Carpenter, you still have the floor, or are you all set? Okay, thank you. All right, open it back up for any further comments or questions. Go ahead, Mrs. Dunn.
You're already laughing. Where are we right now on that bottom line?
So I have us at 95,608,886. Those items that we've identified, or that Dr. Vidal and his team identified, those positions that he outlined, the total of those would be almost 605,000, which would then allow us to take some calculated risk on health insurance. Those open positions, which would get us very close. Okay, please, anybody, comments or questions? All right, why don't we take a, Mr. Swanson?
Appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through to Dr. Vidal, I apologize for being late, so I know you might have covered this. On the business teacher of the high school, could you explain to me if that position is eliminated today? We know we have the new career path coming up. How would those courses be taught, and where would that workload be distributed?
So as of now, we currently have the position for the innovative pathway in the budget. And so that is sort of level funded. What the proposal was to add another position to have even more offerings. And again, it's just there would be less electives. However, we would have the same amount of electives as we do this year. The difference would be we would have the innovation pathway, which is a great addition. And then this position here would just be adding more electives, but we don't have them right now.
When you say adding more electives, business as an elective?
Business electives, yes.
Thank you.
So we still have a department of 4.
Right.
This would have been a 5th teacher that we were hoping to add. But again, if we're looking to reduce, it would be, not to add something that we didn't have this year.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Swanson. Why don't we take a brief 5-minute break? Okay, thank you. All right, thank you, everyone. I'd like to return. We're just trying to reconcile our numbers, make sure that we're all on the same page in terms of our numbers, which I think we are now. And one question I did want to ask to continue the discussion, Dr. Vidala, was Mr. Olympio brought up, which I think was a great point, about the revolving account, maybe using that, which we voted on, to take some additional funding out of the revolving account for athletics in order to put towards another teacher. Is there other revolving account where we can maybe look at in terms of funding another teacher position that you can identify and we can maybe discuss?
Absolutely. So in looking at the revolving accounts, those are from places that generate revenue or collect fees. So the athletics one was one where we collect user fees. Another account is the early childhood, the integrated preschool account at the McCarthy School, which will be at the center school next year. We do currently fund some positions out of that. However, with the amount of money that comes into that position, into that account, we could probably fund another classroom out of that account, basically a full teacher salary and 2 paraprofessionals. So the net to our budget would be that we'd have the offset of those 2. We could take that out of the special education budget, which would be the amount of 1 teacher and 2 paraprofessionals. Should be right around $100,000 to $115,000, and we could fund that out of the revolving account, which would then free up that money for the appropriated account or to reduce the budget.
Okay, I'd like to open that up for discussion and see where we stand with everybody in terms of potentially utilizing some of that early childhood money in the revolving account. Mrs. Carpenter.
Thank you. Through the chair, Dr. Vidala, the revolving account for early childhood, did you say 115 or 150?
I would say about 115 would be about the cost of a teacher and 2 paras. And typically, we try to keep a healthy amount in those revolving accounts in case we need to have additional furniture or expenses that have to do with that. We have provided that furniture, which will move with the classroom, so I do feel confident that for next year we could fund another teacher out of that account.
So if we take that 115 from the early childhood revolving account, you don't see us losing anything or reducing any part of early childhood by doing that?
Not at all. It'll just be funded out of the account. The revolve will have a little bit less funds in it. However, it's sort of like a rainy day fund, and at this time, I think it's a good option for us to use right now, and to take that on. We will receive that amount of money or more in tuition next year, so it won't be putting us at a deficit.
Okay, and we can retain the position of 1 teacher and 2 paras with that? Was that what it came out? Is that what you said?
So we would take that. I mean, we still have to reduce the budget. So we could take that either off of the bottom line, or we could reinstate a teacher, whatever you think, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, I mean, I was just thinking in terms of the positions identified, the teaching position. I think we still have some work to do on the back end, so maybe we can kind of.
So how about I'll do it one step at a time. I'll follow the recommendation of the superintendent in regards to taking the $115,000 out of the early childhood revolving account.
Second.
Okay, thank you, Mrs. Carpenter. Heard the motion, seconded by Mrs. Dunn. Any comments or questions? Okay, roll call vote, please.
Mr. Hockman.
Yes.
Mr. Swanson.
Yes.
Mrs. Dunn.
Yes.
Mr. Olympio.
Yes.
Mrs. Carpenter.
Yes.
Mr. Amico.
Yes.
Okay, so 115 then is going to be utilized from the early childhood revolving account. And we want to identify a position that we'd like to try to bring back? Is there a recommendation or is any thoughts on any of these particular positions? Mr. Hockman?
Thank you. I guess at this point, I'd like to make a pitch for the ELL teacher at the Carroll School. Carroll School's our biggest elementary school, has a significant population that are English language learners. We're adding about 80, I think, center school students to that building during the time that we're renovating the center school. I suspect that a significant number of those 80 are English language learners or would benefit from an ELL teacher. I read at the Carroll School every Monday. I have a fourth grade class. Maybe there's, I don't know, 22 or so students in that class. I got to tell you, 11 of them speak Portuguese, and they speak it to each other as students and help translate things that I'm reading or talking about when I ask questions and things like that. And that's just one classroom within that building, and that's, I can't imagine that they wouldn't benefit from an ELL teacher. So if we're going to go through this process the way we are, pulling money out of accounts and funding staff, that coupled with, my second choice, which would be close, is the Brown School teacher, and I know that there are members of the committee that probably put the Brown School teacher above or would rather see this money spent on that. But representations, I think, made by Dr. Vidala in terms of the class size for grade 2 in 24-25 would remain consistent with the class size that grade had, that same cohort had in grade 1 this year. We're not changing that. We're not increasing their class size. We're just not reducing it, although I do see the value in reducing that as well. So I'm not making a motion as of yet, but I'm just making a pitch for something.
Thank you, Mr. Hockman. Mr. Swanson?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you to Mr. Hockman. I agree with you on that position. I think it's, as we're seeing the populations in the elementary schools grow and the those that are displaced and coming to our schools, this is going to be beneficial to them. It's going to help now, and it's going to grow, help as they grow in our school system. So I'm in agreement with you, and if this moves forward, you'll have my support.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Swanson. Mr. Amico?
Thank you through the chair of the committee. Thank you for all your hard work, everyone. Looking at that revolving account, and I agree with Mr. Hockman with that ELL position at the Carroll. I do also look at that amount of $115,000. If we were able to take a risk and go $143,000 out of that revolving account, we could reinstate both of those teaching positions, one at the Brown and one at the Carroll.
So I would say it's a risk. I think at this point, those are probably the two most needy positions, that I would love to bring back. And I think if we get to the point where we feel like it's unsustainable, we'll have to look at raising tuition. But I do think that these positions are both needed, and if we can support it, we'll take a risk here, and we may be depleting a good amount of that revolving account. But it's tuition in, tuition out is the way I look at it. And if we have to raise tuition in a year from now, or 6 months from now, I think that, having those teachers on staff would be beneficial for us.
So that would be $142,482 for those two positions. Could you amend your motion, Mrs. Carpenter? Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Swanson.
Beforehand, and I appreciate that. Through to Dr. Vidala. I don't disagree with Mr. Miko, but I'm also wondering if we do this and we're not able to fund the paras at the South School, what's the impact there? It's absolutely.
So those are additional positions than we have this year, and we believe that we can service everybody with what we have. It would just be a matter of instead of people transferring into the South School, they'll transfer into a different position. So there are open para positions, and what we're just looking to do at the South is level fund the paras for next school year.
Thank you. Thank you, I yield.
A follow-up question. I'm thrilled that we
Mrs.
can.
Dunn.
Thank you, I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman. I'm really thrilled that we can put these positions back into the budget, but how are we helping to reduce the budget to get to that bottom line? Will that occur under these scenarios? Is that going to help?
Yeah, it makes things a little bit tighter, certainly. I think we can take a little bit of a risk there in health insurance, workers' comp. But yeah, now it's getting tight. But I think this is great to be able to bring back some of these positions. I know we all agree with that. And, yeah, you're going to have to monitor the revolving accounts a little bit more probably than we have in the past. But we took some risk on the city side too, as I mentioned, with Brooksby Farm, Tilly's Farm, our park and recreation accounts that are revolving. So I think this is okay. But yeah, there's definitely going to be some risk we're taking on health insurance. 'Cause I'm going to propose that we hopefully approve this part for these two positions. Then I think the remaining positions that have been outlined, to move with eliminating those positions. And then we can kind of see where we're at with the health insurance. But that was just my thought. But I appreciate Mr. Miko bringing this forward because I think this would be great. So Mrs. Carpenter, would you mind,
Motion amended from 115,000 to 142,482.
thank you, Mrs. Carpenter. Seconded by Mrs. Dunn. Roll call vote, please.
Mr. Hockman.
Yes.
Mr. Swanson.
Yes.
Mrs. Dunn.
Yes.
Mr. Olympio.
Yes.
Mrs. Carpenter.
Yes.
Mr. Miko.
Yes.
The three positions, the four positions remaining would be South School paraprofessional, Higgins Middle School, the two co-teachers, business teacher at the high school, and the ELL teacher at the high school. 5 positions. 4 line items, 5 positions, and that would be $311,880. Mr. Miko?
Through the chair to the superintendent. Dr. Vidala, the business position, that's a new position that no one's in right now, and could there be a possibility, is it Chapter 74 funding that we receive for VOTEC? No. We don't. I'm sorry, through
I'm
the chair
sorry.
to Ms. Dunn, if you would.
No, Dr. Vidala should explain
But
it.
thank you.
And I'll back him up.
Thank you.
So the Chapter 74 funding for vocational programs for the high school, it's incorporated into our Chapter 70 formula. So it's all baked into what we receive for Chapter 70. But it's a good thing to look at.
Through the
But
chair, I was just grasping at straws there. I knew the answer, but I thought,
Yeah, it's not a Chapter 74.
Yeah, I think we just voted to pull money out of the revolving account for early childhood, but we didn't vote on those 2 positions. I don't know if we need to. They're not out of the budget until we vote on it, but if we do, I'd make a motion to reinstate the second grade teacher at the Brown School and the ELL teacher at the Carroll School. So moved.
Second.
Thank you, Mr. Hockman. Further motion, seconded by Mr. Swanson. Roll call vote, please.
Mr. Hockman.
Yes.
Mr. Swanson.
Yes.
Mrs. Dunn.
Yes.
Mr. Olympio.
Yes.
Mrs. Carpenter.
Yes.
Mr. Miko.
yes.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Hockman. All right, open it up. Any more further comments, questions? I suggest that if we were to eliminate those positions, that would come at a total of 311,880. I'd feel comfortable, again, with some risk certainly attached to it. It's definitely a risk, that we could add an additional 500,000 for health insurance and workers' comp reduction. If anybody would entertain that, or open that for discussion. Mr. Swanson?
Sorry, Mr. Chairman, if you could, just, we have a lot of marked up papers. What positions are you recommending? Are you,
So on the
apologize.
remaining ones on the list that were identified by Dr. Vidala was the South Elementary para position, which none of these were in the budget this past year. Special education para at the South, 2 co-teachers at the Higgins Middle School, business teacher at the Veterans Memorial High School, and the ELL teacher at PVMHS.
thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Through the chair to the committee, I'll make a motion to eliminate the business position at Peabody Veterans Memorial High School. So moved.
Ken?
Thank you. You've heard the motion by Mr. Amico, seconded by Mr. Olympio. Any comments, Mr. Hockman?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. What would be the budgetary reduction for that one position?
70,000.
Thank you.
Any other comments, questions, Mr. Amico?
Sure, through the chair to the committee. And the only reason why I'm suggesting that is it's not in the budget right now, probably won't be filled. It's a new program. And hopefully at some point it will be.
Thank you, Mr. Amico. Mr. Hockman?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm just going to say it once so I don't have to do it for each of these motions that are going to come up now. I'm going to be voting no on all these positions. I mean, someone deemed them necessary to put in and consider these new programs and the roles that they fill and the benefits that we receive from them. I've talked at prior meetings about some administrators that I thought we should be taking up, and the perhaps some redundancies that we have within administrative roles and some tightening of belts that can take place in administrative roles. And we're taking an awful lot of risks. This is, for me, I'm holding my nose because we're taking an awful lot of risks, and there's a horrible accounting practices that we're exhibiting tonight. And I hope none of our students are watching because it's really, it's tough. So anyway, until we take up some, what I think is my personal opinion, not a good choice. There are no good choices left here for us tonight or whenever we're done with this thing, but an alternative choice being some administrators that I think we can trim a little bit on. I won't be voting to support any further either reductions or non-starts for any teaching positions.
Thank you, Mr. Hockman. Okay, roll call vote.
Mr. Hockman.
No.
Mr. Swanson.
Yes.
Mrs. Dunn.
Yes.
Mr. Olympio.
Yes.
Mrs. Carpenter.
Yes.
Mr. Miko?
Yes.
Thank you. All right. Any other comments, questions at this time? All right, let's take a 5-minute break. All right. Thank you, everyone. Let's resume. And let's open it up for discussion. Any comments, questions at this time? Mrs. Dunn, did turn it to you?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Cut you off earlier.
No, nope, that's okay. All right. So my understanding is we need to try to cut $311,880 off of this page that we're working from.
Well, we did vote to eliminate the business position. So it's
Right.
down to, those 4 remaining positions would be 241,
Okay.
880.
I would like to make a motion to cut the special ed paraprofessionals at the South, the 2 new co-teachers at the Higgins, the ELL teacher at the high school, 1, 2, 3. And the retirement of the math teacher, is that one that we have already decided we're just not going to refill? Oh, we brought it back? Yes. Okay, so that one's safe. Okay, so I'd like to make a motion on those 4, actually, 1, 2, 3, 4 positions. Thank you. So moved.
Okay, thank you, Mrs. Dunn. That would be a number of 241, 880. Do we have a second on the motion?
Second.
Okay, you've heard the motion by Mrs. Dunn, seconded by Mr. Olympio. Thank you. Comments? Mr. Hockman?
Yeah, thank you. Mrs. Dunn, thank you for bringing this motion. As I stated, I'm not going to support it. I do have other thoughts on how we can get to the number that I think we're going to get to, but reasons already stated, so thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hockman. Mr. Amico?
Right, through the chair of the committee, before I can support that, I'd like to hear what, through the chair, what Mr. Hockman had to say. At this point, I won't support the motion.
Okay. Any other comments, questions, Mrs. Dunn?
I don't want to support this either, but this is a tough part of our position of trying to decide what we can keep and what we can cut from the budget. The only reason that I feel a little bit of comfort is because I'm looking at the budget that we have and the funding we have, and I think it's important that we're able to at least maintain what we have. Basically, and it's not the right term, but I don't know what else to use, I'm saying we're in more or less a level-funded budget. These items were brought to us as wonderful things to have to be able to move forward. But because of funding, we can't do it. And I feel confident that at least everything that we have been working for and all of the things that are in place now will continue. And that, to me, is important because we're seeing results from what we've been doing, and I think that's something that you need to look at. That's, at least that's where I'm coming from. I don't want to cut these. I'd like everything possible for the school budget, but we just can't and have to make a tough decision.
Thank you, Mrs. Dunn. Mr. Swanson?
Thank you. Mr. I agree with you. This is not something we want to be doing. These are not, but I give a lot to the staff that Dr. Vidal has worked with. I've talked to several over the last few days, and these are not made in isolation. These are made with understanding that, as you said, that this is level funding, this is level setting. This is maintaining what we've built. When I say we, I apologize, because I owe it all. It's all to Dr. Vidal, his staff, and our educators on the support over the last few years. Do we want to continue growing? Absolutely. But we're at a point right now that, maybe some fighting words, but our state government has let us down, to be very frank, and this is the position that we're in. Do we want to be having these positions? Absolutely. Do we need this? I think we do. But if money's open, we know that we were able to save some that are critical. These would be ones that would be able to fund if we got some additional funds coming in from our state. And the legislators put some priority on correcting their mistakes, these would come back. So in the conversations I've had with several of the principals in the buildings, not that our educators, their staff, they're not going to be in a better position. They're still going to have to work extremely hard, but this is what they concede is the best for our students right now. So that's I agree with you, Ms. Dunn. It's not where we want to be, but the conversation's been had and it's been vetted over the last few weeks. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Swanson. Just to add to that, I do feel, yep, thank you. I'll let that go. Any other comments, Mr. Amico?
With the chair to Ms. Dunn, and Ms. Dunn, I apologize if I didn't mean it that way. You know. And thank you, Mr. Swanson, through the chair to you as well for those words as well. I'm going to be honest with you. We're going to be making some difficult decisions tonight, and we're going to be making some difficult decisions next year and probably the year after. Things are not going to, and I hope I'm dead wrong, but you know, we look at the climate and what's going on in the state. We see the, as I mentioned the other night, the office tax rolls in Boston are way low. You know, you want to throw out other things like the Stewart healthcare mess. The state's going to have to pay for some of that. The cost of healthcare, that's going up. State's going to have to take care of some of that. Infrastructure, you know, we watch the news. Bridges, roads, overpasses. That's all coming from that pie that education is part of. Our pie, our slice is shrinking, and it's going to shrink. I hope I'm wrong, but I don't think I am. And then throw the MBTA into that mix. We're in for lean times over the next few years, and you know we're gonna have to make difficult decisions next year and the year after, but we're gonna have to make some difficult decisions tonight as well.
Thank you, Mr. Miko. Okay, we have a motion in front of us. Mrs. Carpenter, on the motion.
I would just like to ask if Mrs. Dunn would hold her motion so I can hear, I think Mr. Hockman said he had something to add before possibly doing that.
Okay, so we'll hold that motion until it's brought back up again. Mr. Hockman or Mr. Amico, do one of you?
Yep.
Mr. Hockman?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think that we can get closer to the number by reducing budget line 22015 by $139,951. These are positions, administrative budget.
Say that number again, please, Mr. Hockman.
The line number is 22015. It's on page 25 of our original budget. I don't know if they got renumbered as we've been getting new versions. And the budgetary implication would be $139,951. I think this, in essence, in practical purposes, would probably reduce one FTE, because I think that this line represents 50% compensation for each of two individuals.
So I'll just go on the record that I think that this reduction would hurt the district significantly, and there is some liability here, and if this were, if this were a motion, it were to pass, I would have to recommend that the committee add $50,000 to workman's comp because of the upcoming liability that could be an impact from this vote. So I don't think you would realize the full 138. You'd have to add to protect yourself in workman's comp that you would not have to add from Mrs. Dunn's motion.
Thank you, Dr. Vidala. Any comments, Mr. Olympio?
When you say liability, what kind of liability are you speaking of?
If you're reducing a position that someone is currently in at this time of year, not only the effects that it has on the district and our ability to operate, but the effects that it would have moving forward. At this time of year, it's probably going to be harder for people who are in a current position to find a new position, and that we would be on the hook for workman's comp, for unemployment, I'm sorry, not workman's comp, for unemployment. But we'd have to add that unemployment, not workman's comp, thank you. But that unemployment liability, I think we would have to add in just to protect the district.
Thank you. I'll yield.
Any other comments, questions? All right. Mr. Swanson.
Thank you. Through you to,
Mr. Mayor, just procedurally, I need a second before we can have this conversation.
Is there a second on the motion by Mr. Hockman?
Second for discussion.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Miko. You've heard the acceptance of the motion, or seconded motion for discussion. Mr. Swanson, to you.
thank you. Although I don't disagree with the premise behind it, I think the timing is critical. I fully agree with your comments before, Mr. Amico, of this year is rough. Next year is not going to be any better. But we need to plan this out. If these positions are reduced, how will it affect the education and the programs that we're rolling out now? That's my big concern. And the support for our staffs. That's something we can plan for over the next year, but I think in the reaction right now, my opinion, is not the right time. I yield.
Thank you, Mr. Swanson. And I'll just add to that. I would be concerned about this this cut. I do think that there's work we can do to find other opportunities to make the reduction. Certainly my goal individually was to not have anybody in the district potentially lose a position. And that's why I felt much more comfortable, even though it was not ideal, to look at some elimination of some teaching positions which didn't have a person attached to them and were new positions, where this would be a cut that would eliminate somebody who has employment here. And I also do believe, from learning more about the positions and the administrative support that's provided to the teacher, I do think this would be a very difficult elimination. And I would, if I'm a tiebreaker, I would vote no. Any other comments or questions, Mr. Hockman?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you to the committee members. I know we're not talking about easy stuff, but I can assure you that I've talked to scores of teachers in the district that they may even applaud the elimination of one of these positions because they feel like it hampers their instruction, doesn't assist them. But I'm sure there are some teachers in the district, I'm sure there are many teachers in the district that think that this, the work performed in these lines is valuable. I would say it's, as far as I can see, no more than a 50-50 split, which is one of the reasons that I brought these up. Part of the problem that I have, and it's my personal ideology and views, is we get grant money all the time, and we create positions out of grant money, and we create programs out of grant money, and then the grant money dries up, and then we say, well, we can't eliminate that program because there's a person tied to a position, and the funding source for that dries up. And I, fully believe in democracy. I believe that 4 out of the 7 of us, or 6 of us, if the mayor doesn't have to vote, we determine what we're going to do. And you guys have been loud and clear, as loud and clear as I've been. The prep is something that came up out of grant money, ESSER money. It came up because there was a specific need, during COVID, and there was people who were frightened, and the technology was able to come up to speed, and I kind of always thought that was going to sunset with the elimination or the reduction of COVID. I mean, it's always going to float around, but it doesn't impact us nearly the way it did a few years ago. And we made a decision as a body against my objection that we're going to keep that, right? So again, respectfully, Mr. Mayor, we're not only I think respectful of each other professionally, but we're friends, and I hear where you're coming from. I don't want to address a line item that has a body attached to it either. But if I'm looking at moving the district forward, right, and there's just philosophical differences, and I respect, Dr. Vidala's opinion on this, and we've disagreed about this behind closed doors and, out in the open. It's just a philosophical difference. I want to move the district forward by funding those new programs, right? That business teacher at the high school now, so that we can start a new program. I want to co-teaching at the Higgins, right, is a model that we've gone to, and it's something that we have an opportunity to expand. And we're talking about expanding it, not because it fails, but because it works, right? Because it would help kids, it would help students. Can we do without it for a year or 2 years until money gets a little bit, fatter for us? Sure, but I guess what I'm at the point of now is just a philosophical difference, and that's all. So I think we have, I think Mr. Amico seconded it for discussion purposes. I respectfully ask that you second it for a vote, and it goes how it goes. That's just the way we do business.
Thank you, Mr. Hockman. Before we go, Dr. Chase wanted to comment.
So I do have a list of ways that these positions are super critical to the district, also in moving the district forward. I think one of the things that we all agree upon is protecting the classroom. And these are just some of the ways off the top of my head that these positions do protect the classroom. So there are a number of grants that we've gotten that are not attached to positions, but rather attached to professional development for teachers, putting new materials in the hands of teachers, and then providing some critical support for that as well. And I've explained before when we've done some grants that I always try to look at 3 different buckets. One is a bucket for materials, one is a bucket for professional development, and the third one is putting stipend money in the pockets of teachers to do that learning, which is a nice bonus. So in thinking of the positions, I think it's important to understand what could be lost if you also lose those positions. So some of the things that we've brought in for grants are tied to requirements by the state. So for example, if we look at high-quality instructional materials, that's where we're moving in terms of a state to put the teachers with the hands of ELA materials, math materials, science materials. That is a rigorous process that takes multiple years to go through. The first year is choosing the materials, but the second and third years are also about supporting teachers as they learn how to use those materials. That requires a heck of a lot of work behind the scenes to make sure that happens. It requires visit from our partners. It requires extensive meeting time with DESE. It requires that we report data, and it requires that we provide professional development. So that's related to both math, ELA, and also science on a smaller scale for grades 6 through 8. We are currently in the process of going into year 3 of implementation for K through 5 ELA and going into year 1 of GLEAM. That comes with significant grant funding, significant professional development, and support from the Department of Ed. We won't be able to move forward with that if we start to eliminate these positions. We also have the civics education grant, which is a requirement that we have civics education for our students. And without oversight and without those grants, we lose the professional development, we lose the stipends for teachers, and we lose the exciting things that have already helped our district move forward by giving kids agency and voice over projects that are important to them. Moving on to Holocaust and genocide studies, again, also grant funded. Also professional development for teachers. On the science side, we have chased after grants for mass life sciences that provide funding for textbooks at the middle school level, funding for materials, and professional development to go along with that. On a smaller scale, we have Project Lead the Way, which is for technology. There's STEM Honor Society. There's multiple years of ST Math that we've put in place. We also have high-dosage tutoring that I need assistance with so that I can coordinate that. That tutoring happens for math in grades 4 and 8, putting money in the pockets of teachers and giving students the critical support that they need, and high-dosage tutoring for literacy as well. We've partnered with Springboard for a number of years. We anticipate continuing with them in the future, and it's because of the good work that we're doing with our partners, with the Department of Ed. Other people outside of the district have been told to contact us when we have grants to look at, because we are a good partner that has a solid track record with being able to provide support for teachers. So although you might not have directly front-facing in terms of a classroom teacher, they are working alongside our staff to make sure that they not only have the professional learning, but also opportunities to earn money while they're learning and additional funding throughout the summer. We're part of a learning acceleration network
that's with the Department of Ed and TNTP. They come in and provide coaching as well. We're working on things like summer programming, where we have multiple programs running at once, and the list goes on and on. Already we're talking about how do we get as much professional development in from the time that our kids go home for school, before teachers really go out for that 4th of July week, so that we can, again, put money in the pockets of teachers and make sure that they have the training they need. I think that's a solid investment that we give every day. It's not work that you can see in terms of being a teacher in front of a classroom, but it's certainly work that takes a whole lot of time and also moves the district forward.
Thank you, Dr. Chase. Mr. Olympio, did, okay, thank you. Mrs. Carpenter?
Thank you. Through the chair, Dr. Chase, thank you for that description. And I have a couple of questions. These positions, how were they funded before? Because our budget book just goes to 2024. How were they previously funded? Because half of these positions are in grants. What did we do in years past?
So in years past, the full FTE for one of the positions was there, and the other position was in the PLA budget. As the PLA administrator, that position has been repurposed to one of these positions.
So is it possible, so each of these positions is funded half through the district and half through a grant. Is it possible for this, for these two positions to be combined into one?
Given the volume of what Dr. Chase said, I wouldn't recommend that. I think it's a disservice to the kids and to the teachers here, given the volume of the work that they do and the impact that they have. So it wouldn't be my recommendation to have one. I think we need both.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Carpenter. Any other questions, comments? Mr. Hockman?
Yeah, no, thank you. Dr. Chase, I appreciate the exhaustive list that you provided us with the work that these administrators perform. And it just gets me in the back of the throat a little bit, because I don't see the same passion fighting for teachers or paraprofessionals or people, tier 2 specialists that are helping kids. I appreciate your passion for your people, right? I appreciate that that's important, and I'm not saying that the positions aren't important. I'm not saying that. I can tell you, I know education's changed a lot in the 15 years I've been here, but when I got here, we had one superintendent, one assistant superintendent, and the assistant superintendent took on the roles that you just described, and it might not have been, as robust as what you're describing, but some of those functions were certainly performed by some of those people. I'm not bringing the motion up as I devalue what they do. I'm just saying that there are choices that need to be made, and in my opinion, this is a choice that I can live with over the other bad choices that I'm going to be faced with. And Ms. Dunn's identified them, and other committee members may be bringing up other unpalatable choices. I could look at it, I've talked in past meetings, we have two early childhood programs and two different directors, and I'm hearing back that that's not a palatable choice to consolidate those services. So I'm just trying to find a way somewhere in what I think is, the organizational chart that I'm looking at, that we received through the administration. It just seems like it's got some room to move somewhere, and I've offered and asked as many ways as I can, what are your thoughts on it? And if I'm not getting much back, I'm told everything is essential. I disagree, and I gotta find a number to make a budget from what our funding source is willing to give us, or is capable of giving us. And without participation, I'm gonna make I'm making the motion that I'm making. And like I said to my committee members, if you can't support it, you can't support it. That's democracy, right? But that's my choice right now.
Thank you, Mr. Hockman. Mrs. Dunn?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As I said before, we are making difficult decisions. but I do want to thank Dr. Chase for giving us the information about team members. Way before any of you had kids in the school district, I had kids in the district before I became a school committee member. So I lived through a time when, yes, we had a superintendent, and sometimes we had an assistant superintendent. That was never even a guarantee. And those people had to do a million different duties, and they couldn't do 100% on every single duty they were thrown. And someone was going to pick up the slack here, and someone was going to pick up the slack there. And when I got on the school committee, much of what we're doing now was talked about. And that was over 20 years ago. This district has waited for almost 20 years or longer to get to a really good point where we had the support for our staff. Our teachers in the classroom were being tasked with doing many of the duties that are now taking place behind the scenes by other employees. That is how a good school system operates, and we knew it all along. We've talked about it all along, and we finally got to the point where we were able to put these things in place. Changing a district does not happen overnight. But the work that's been done over the past 3 years, building a full team, which includes teachers and administrators, has taken a couple of years, and we're only in the middle of it. I believe it's 5 years before you really can see the results you're looking at. We've seen some results come sooner than the general number. I don't know how it's generated. But everybody has been working to create a good school system. If you start tearing it down again, you're going to go right back to the way we were before. And people will leave because they're not being supported. And that is an important piece of the puzzle. People see a teacher in front of a classroom, and that is prime. But just like and you all talk about athletics, you go watch a game. Who's out in the field? The players and the coach. What about all the people behind the scenes that none of us know about? What about the guy that drives the tractor out there and drags equipment across the field? You want the coach to do that? No, we hire someone to do that. We never had an athletic trainer before. Somebody got hurt on a field, they limped off. The coach yelled at a kid to go bandage them. Seriously. There are people who do jobs in support positions, and they are needed and necessary, and we've finally reached that point. Now, the funding is difficult, and I understand that, because we've hit a wall we knew was coming. The fiscal cliff is here. We don't want to go over it, but we've got to a good point where if we can hold our ground for another year, we'll be able to make significant noticeable gains, and that's what's important. And that's why, even though I don't like cutting the teachers that were proposed for new programs or new positions, that's the only way to keep going in the direction that we've been doing for the past couple of years. And that was why I made that motion. That's why I cannot support the motion that you've brought forward, Mr. Hockman, and that's why I wanted to let everybody know, use some perspective here. Think back of what it used to be like, and it was probably before any of you even lived here. And I hate doing this to everybody because I feel like I shouldn't always bring back history, but if you want to have a problem, don't pay attention to the history because it's doomed to repeat itself.
Thank you, Mrs. Dunn. Mr. Miko.
Thank you through the chair, and thank you, Ms. Dunn, for that. That was well said. I will say that, unfortunately, the fiscal cliff has hit us. And Mr. Swanson said it earlier, the state's let us down. It certainly has. And it's going to let us down again next year, more than likely, because the numbers don't look good already. We're going to make difficult decisions. We're going to have to have difficult decisions next year about laying off teachers. laying off probably paras and anyone else that comes in encounter with students directly. So unfortunately, difficult decisions are going to be made next year, this year, and I don't view this as an easy decision. I think Dr. Chase does an incredible job, and I believe everything that she says. This has nothing to do, for me, about a person, about a position, about what they do. It really is a financial decision, and that's one of the things that we are challenged with as being school committee members, especially being school committee members in a fiscal year that comes to us where we're certainly low on funds. And I made the analogy that, you can't go grocery shopping with cash in your pocket, and if you only have $100, you can't buy $150 worth of groceries. And I feel like that's where we're put here. And, we thought we'd be getting some more funding, and that's not going to happen, apparently. So, unfortunately, we have to make difficult decisions and hard decisions that hurt. I don't think anyone here enjoys making these decisions. I've been dreading it all day, coming here and potentially having to cut a person or a position. But this is what we have to do. And I will be supporting this in hopes that some funding, some grant money comes up and that position can be reinstated somehow, because I do see a value in it. But for me, this is a financial decision, just as, cutting the position at the high school will be, or several positions next year. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Amico. Mr. Olympio?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This isn't an easy decision. When I first started this process weeks back, I had a little bit different perspective. I was a little bit more aggressive, but I always said there has to be a compromise. It's got to be a give and take on both sides, and not that there is sides, but as Mr. Amico stated, it is going to get worse. We have reached the financial cliff. I mean, I can't see things turn around or getting better. And to me, again, when I first started this process, I was thinking a lot more aggressive than just one position at admin. I was thinking maybe 3 or 4, to be honest with you. We did receive that one position will be retiring, so that certainly changed my perspective a little bit. But I think I will be supporting Mr. Hockman's motion. We have to make some tough decisions. And I honestly, I was torn last year with this decision as well, but, and I voted for it, but this year, I want to really fund those classrooms, and again, tough decision. We've done this before. I'm not saying that makes it better, but we have cut positions before. And I've actually looked at people in the eye as I was making the motion that I knew that I was going to be cutting their position. So just wanted to let people know where I stand on that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Olympio. All right, Mr. Swanson.
Thank you. Perspective. The way that I look at it is, again, I'm not contesting the review of this position, but if we fill these positions that are vacant now for a year, we gain a year, and then we have to come back, and they're going to be on the board again. Where if they're not filled, again, we might be looking at administrative positions, we might be looking at others, but we can plan for those down the road as we know what the environment's going to be. Filling those positions today, yes, it's going to be advantageous to our staff, to our students, but next year, if this comes to fruition, there's 6, 7 positions that are already on the cutting board that we gave for a year. Again, planning is what we should be doing if we see this cliff coming. I know we say it's here. We're starting to come over the cliff, over the edge, but how do we avoid the long-term problems and filling positions to temporarily eliminate them next year is not the way that I want to operate, so.
All right, thank you. Okay. Roll call vote.
Mr. Hockman?
Yes.
Mr. Swanson?
No.
Mrs. Dunn?
No.
Mr. Olympio?
Yes.
Mrs. Carpenter,
Yes.
Mr. Miko.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. I would ask that we move forward with Mrs. Dunn's motion for those 4 positions at $241,800. And then I would propose we take a risk, which is now a bigger risk, but a risk that I think we can take on health insurance, workers' comp, of $487,113. And then I would kick in on the city side an additional $250. And then I would propose that we're complete. Mrs. Dunn?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I will bring forward the motion that I had made previously to reduce the budget by removing the professional special education, I'm sorry, the paraprofessional special education paraprofessionals from the South Elementary School, 2 co-teachers at the Higgins Middle School, and the ELL teacher at the high school. So moved.
Second.
Thank you. You've heard the motion by Mrs. Dunn, seconded by Mr. Swanson. Any comments on the motion? Mr. Hockman?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. In light of the vote we just took, and your representations as far as that package, if you will, for lack of a better term, can you increase your 250 to 300 to put in the line for the unemployment that Dr. Vidala identified might be a risk that we can at least cover?
I think we can take that risk, Mr. Hockman.
And then I'd ask Ms. Dunn if she can amend her motion to incorporate all that the mayor has identified in that quote-unquote package.
I will add to that, in addition to those cuts, we will take a risk and cut $487,113 from our insurance and workman's compensation lines, with the addition into the budget of $250,000 from the mayor, from the city side.
All right, Mrs. Dunn, I just want to check the numbers, and Mr. Rippon, if you could check for me. I believe that those 4 positions total $241,800. $241,800. $880.
Yes.
Then I would propose the reduction that was just voted would be $139,951 minus $487,033 in reduction in health insurance and workers' comp. And then the city would kick in $250,000. And I have a number of $94,527,540. Okay. Mrs. Dunn, is that okay with your motion?
Yes.
Okay. Further motion by Mrs. Dunn, seconded by Mr. Swanson. Any comments, questions? Mr. Miko?
Through the chair of the committee, I won't be supporting the motion just because of the full-time teachers that would potentially be hired back and brought back next year. And again, with the climate, financial climate next year and possibly the year after, I see significant cuts, so I won't be supporting it.
Thank you, Mr. Miko. Mrs. Dunn?
Just for the public, just so that people can understand, these positions were proposed. There's no person in that position currently. So we say we're cutting the budget, we're cutting that proposed position, not a person who's currently employed.
Correct. That's my understanding, is that these were just positions that were proposed that do not have a employee attached to them,
Right,
nor were they employees last year.
right.
Okay. All right. Roll call vote, please.
Mr. Hockman,
Yes.
Mr. Swanson,
Yes.
Mrs. Dunn,
Yes.
Mr. Olympio,
Yes.
Mrs. Carpenter,
Yes.
Mr. Miko.
No.
Okay, thank you. Any other items? So do we need to vote on the full budget of 94,527,540?
We could vote on that number, but we shouldn't vote on the budget till we see it in writing.
So we have to have a public hearing?
Right, so the public
Yeah,
hearing
yeah.
would be next
So we'll
week.
put together the budget with the line items as adjusted, and the committee can vote for that on Monday.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Vidala. Any other items before we adjourn then?
Recess.
Before we recess until the public hearing? And that was scheduled. Public hearing is scheduled Monday, June 3rd, 6:30 PM. We'll adjourn till then. Thank you, everyone.